Today we're going to go deep, not into the whole system, but specifically into the Pytes V5 batteries. Delivery, packaging, rack strategy, cable management, current limits, what manufacturers don't tell you about real-world installs. If you're planning to use rack batteries, this video is for you because I'm going to talk a little bit about rack batteries in general, but I'm also going to spend a lot of time talking about the Pytes batteries, why I selected those, and then how I did the installation for those. Now the first thing, let's talk about how they arrived. Now I ordered 8 batteries, so they came on a pallet just like this, and as you can see, there are 8 stacked batteries. Now they just left it at the bottom of my curve like this. Now I did use this dolly right here, and I just basically moved 1 or 2 batteries at a time, put them on here and brought them up there. But expect that if you've got a little bit of an angle on your driveway, they're probably not going to take it all the way up there. They had a lot of issues because this is, 900-ish pounds that's sitting right here. Each battery weighs around 100 pounds. So this is a lot of weight on this pallet, and they couldn't get it to go up the driveway. So they just kind of left it right there. Getting it up there actually wasn't that hard, especially with the dolly. I just put 2 batteries, like I said, and then put it into my garage. And my garage was kind of my loading zone for this installation. That's where everything kind of got pre-staged as I got ready for the installation. Now this is the box. Now, I got to tell you, they use some high quality boxes for the Pytes V5 batteries. It reminds me of Apple product is how I would describe this. Now, I wouldn't say that they would hold up great if they were being bounced around and moved all over the place. Yes, they're kind of like a cardboard, a really thick cardboard, but it's kind of just a cardboard box. But they really did do a great job with the packaging for the Pytes V5 batteries. Now here's the inside of the box and essentially what it looks like. And you can see it's this really thick cardboard layered together to essentially shield the battery and protect it. And these break down really, really easily. Also, if you're doing your installation, you have to plan for getting rid of all these boxes also. These things broke down incredibly easy. They just kind of laid flat, and then I put them up there for the recycling to pick up. Wasn't an issue for me at any point for getting rid of these boxes. And here's the battery inside the box. So you can kind of see how it is assembled here. So this box just kind of slides on there after you get the straps off. And then you get the battery and the installation manual here. And then there will be some accessories such as the Ethernet cable and the battery cables also as part of this installation. Now for the installation, I'm not going to actually walk you through the installation that I did. I didn't actually record it. All I did for the installation was I went to the Pytes Energy channel here and watched them do the installation. And then I just kind of followed along exactly what they did. And this is a great video. I got to admit, they did a really good job recording how to do the installation. It really is just this easy. So if you just go to the Pytes V5 Energy channel and watch this video, if you're doing the installation, it's really simple to follow along with this. And I'll put a link for this video in the description of this video, so it's very easy for you to follow. But it is just that easy. I did exactly like they did here. I hooked up the grounding straps. Now this bottom grounding strap here, I connected to my case. So this is connected to my server rack case. And then for my server rack case, I've actually got it to the grounding system inside of my basement. And then I did the exact same thing here. Now, what they don't tell you is the Newton meters you want to use here. That's not in the installation manual. That's an oversight on their part. This is supposed to be 7 Newton meters that you're supposed to torque these down to. So don't over torque them. In my case, I actually over torqued them. It wasn't in the installation manual, so I just went to kind of hand tight. I didn't like crank down on them, but I did go a little bit too far, and I actually had a bolt snap off when I was removing it. I did the entire setup just to get everything updated because I wanted to reach out to Pytes and have them do the firmware update. And I ended up taking it apart to actually break it down into groups. And when I did that, the bolt actually did snap off. Now, if you're doing a Sol Ark installation, even better, this thing actually shows you how to set up the Sol Ark portion of it also. So this is a Sol Ark, and the Sol Ark 18K, 15K, it's pretty much the exact same process regardless which one you use. But this video is great if you're actually doing a Sol Ark installation. It'll tell you exactly where to plug everything in, as well as where to put the dip switches for the installation of a Sol Ark. But again, they don't tell you the Newton meters for the torque, so that is 7 Newton meters. And I would highly recommend you reach out to Pytes just to confirm that it hasn't changed, depending on what changes with these batteries based on new products that get released, new generations of the batteries. So you might want to just reach out if it's not in there. I did reach out to Pytes and say, hey, why don't you have that in the installation manual? It's very easy for somebody to over torque this if you don't have that in there. Now, in my case, I actually did break off a screw like I mentioned, and I had to back that out of there. Fortunately, it was really easy to get out of the hole, and then I just went to Home Depot and bought some replacement bolts to kind of put in there. And since I replaced one, I figured I'll just replace all of them. So I actually replaced all of the bolts that I used for the installation. Now, one thing I was going to mention as part of the installation, I did record this step. If you flatten these things down and get them to line up with the hole, it's a lot easier to work with it that way. So what I recommend is when you're connecting them, you flatten it down, extend it so that it lines up really well here. It kind of just snaps right in here. They don't tell you this in the installation, and the installation video from Pytes doesn't show it. This really does fit perfectly in here. So if you get this lined up perfectly, it's going to line up with that hole really well there. And this is me actually aligning this. Now, I don't do a perfect job here, but you see I'm trying to fit it into these almost snug fit right there. And if you do that right, this will actually line up perfectly and it'll hold it there. And as you can see, I'm not even holding it anymore, and it's just kind of sitting there. Now, I did pause this because this is the end of the video, but you can see here, this is the replacement bolt that I put in here. So this is not the one that they give you. The one they give you actually allows for a screwdriver also, which is really kind of unnecessary. I did reach out to them to see if I could get replacements directly from them, and they basically sent me to a link that was very similar to what I could get at Home Depot. So they don't have replacement bolts that they can send you apparently, which I still think is a little strange. Pretty much any bolt that's sized appropriately is going to fit in here without a problem. Now, the batteries themselves are 3.2U in height. Now, this is a standard server rack, so each one of these spaces is 1U in height. So when you put these together, you're going to have a little bit of a gap between each of the batteries. Now, in this case down here, I actually have an extra 1U space here. I left 1U extra space here just to allow for the battery cable to be bent in here. If you didn't leave this extra space in there, I'm not entirely sure that you could get this in there, or the amount of force that you're going to be putting on these bolts would be pretty significant. So I do recommend that you have a little bit of a space, or you plan based on whatever server rack you're going to use or whatever rack you're going to try to use with this. Plan for a little bit of extra space between your groups. Now, in this case, I've got a 4 battery group below this, and then this is the top 4 battery group for a total of 8 batteries inside of this rack here. But again, you can kind of see how this is all set up here. You've got your grounding cables that are all connected here, and then again, it attaches at the bottom of the server rack together. These wires are incredibly long. I could probably cut these in half and use one cable for 2 battery connections. It's that much extra staying. I mean, you can kind of see it goes way up here and then comes back down here. So I might actually shorten these over the long haul and cut these down to fit them a little bit better. I didn't plan for shortening these, so I didn't have these connectors available to do this myself. I've got all the necessary hardware. I just don't actually have these terminal connections here for setting this up like that. So I left it the way that it is, and I just kind of tucked the cables in here. And then again, you just connect all of your batteries in parallel here and then put it into groups. Now, in the Pytes installation manual, they do recommend battery groups of 3. In my case, I reached out to Pytes and gave them my specs for my system and what I was trying to do, and said that I needed to do 4 because it didn't make any sense to have 2 groups of 3 and a group of 2. It really just didn't make a lot of sense there. And actually, I probably would have only been able to fit 2 groups of 3 and then 1 battery, because you do need this extra space between your groups in order to get the 4-aught cable in there. Now, if you're not using 4-aught cable, then you might have an easier time with this. 4-aught cable was definitely a tight fit to get this to fit in there. And then you can see the Ethernet cable connections here. You're going from this second to the right into the first one and all the way down to the end here. And then for the Sol Ark, you connect through the CAN port here to the actual Sol Ark. And this is actually the installation guide right up here. I left it right next to the batteries in case I need to do shutdown or turn on the batteries over time. That way I always have this installation guide right there, easy access for it. And then here's where you connect your Wi-Fi dongle. It does support all your connected batteries, so you don't need a Wi-Fi dongle for each battery. You connect one, and then it basically allows for update and visibility of all of the batteries in that group. Now, one problem with the Pytes Wi-Fi dongle is that it essentially connects on here and then it sticks out. So if I had a door on this, there's no way that the door would shut. And without a door, there's a really high probability that somebody's going to walk into this thing and break it. So they sell an adapter, and you can get this from the portal that I'm showing here if you want to use that. But you buy that connector, and I would say that it's not a great setup. Really, all you need is this cable, and I've just got the Wi-Fi dongle laying at the top of here. I might eventually find a way to mount this correctly, but I would say that the attachments they give you don't really work very great for mounting. It's more about buying the cable. So all you really need is the cable, not necessarily the adapter they give you. Just expect that that adapter is probably not going to be what you're looking for as far as mounting hardware. You're probably going to want to find a different approach for mounting it should you want to do that. But that's essentially how the installation of this is set up. And as you can see here, you can kind of see the dipsticks. And I'll try to zoom in a little bit so you can see that a little bit closer. But again, the installation video from Pytes is pretty good when it comes to the setup and specifically those dip switches. Now let's talk a little bit about the rack and then some comments about the entire industry when it comes to racks. I went with the Middle Atlantic Economy Rack Ark 3525. There's a couple different variations of this rack available online. In this particular configuration here, it doesn't come with the wheelbase and it doesn't come with the front door, but it essentially comes with what you need just to have a case. This case can support up to 2,300 pounds based on most websites that I read. There are some conflicting numbers for this, but I believe 2,300 pounds is what the entire case can support. But of note, when you add the wheelbase to this, then you're capped out at 1,300 pounds. So you want to take that into consideration. 1,300 pounds is more than enough for 8 batteries. And again, 35U allowed for me to have 8 batteries with an extra 1U used at the bottom, in the middle, and at the top. So plenty for my setup. If you wanted to get more batteries, there are other options out there that go up to 42 or even 46U in height if you can fit that. Just keep in mind that if you're planning to have a rack full of batteries, you are going to want to have your groups at least have 1U of extra space in between in order to facilitate those cables if you're going to use 4/0 cable. If you're going to use a different size cable, then it might work with just the space that comes between based on the 1U that essentially is not fully filled between each battery. Now, this is the case option that you can get from Pytes. And you can see it's $467 for essentially a 3 battery cabinet. Now you can stack this, so you could add another stack of batteries on top of this. So 1 extra case for a total of 6. And there are some bracket options. I'm going to show some of the other options you've got when we start taking a look at where you can buy a lot of this stuff. But this is an option out there. Now here is kind of my complaint about the entire industry when it comes to rack batteries. If you're buying rack batteries, more than likely you're trying to maximize your vertical space. When you buy wall-mounted batteries, you're taking advantage of your wall and essentially you're horizontal. So the length of your wall is going to be filled with batteries. In my case, as you saw in some of the previous videos, I don't have a lot of space on my wall, so that wasn't really an option. Now, rack batteries obviously do take up a certain amount of wall space when you're using them. So you want to maximize the vertical height of your basement, garage, wherever you're putting these. Now, a 3 battery case is probably one of the worst designs I've seen in all of the options out there. EG4, for example, they've got a 3 battery also, but they've got a 6 battery. We want more than 6 batteries. We want the ability to put as many batteries as we can in the available space that we've got. Now, 3 batteries, because that's the configuration that they recommend from Pytes, makes sense if you could stack these 3 high. And I did reach out to Pytes and they said, yes, if you take the wheels off, you could stack it 3 high. So you'd have essentially 9 batteries in there. But if we take a look at this, where does the battery cable in this fit? Now, in this particular example here, I'm guessing they probably aren't using a 4/0 cable because there's no way you're making that bend right there with 4/0. So this is probably 2/0 cable in here to make that work. So you're not going to be using this with 4/0, except there is another option out there that I'm going to show you in a little bit that might make something like this work. But more importantly, their spec sheet doesn't say that this actually supports stacking 3 high. So if it's not on their spec sheet, you run into potential warranty issues down the line. Even if they reply to your email and say, yes, you could do it, you just got to take the wheels off of it in order to do this. I'd be hesitant to do that because if it was designed to be stacked 3 high, it would say that on the spec sheet and it would list everything on there. Usually you put on your spec sheet what your capabilities are, and if it's not there, it's probably not fully supported to do that. And this is the same problem with EG4. If you reach out to them, they'll probably say that you could put a 3 stack battery on top of a 6 battery. But again, their spec sheets don't actually say that that's supported. Now, in the case of Pytes, what's kind of strange is, let's say I stack this 3 high, that's 9 batteries. 2 stacks is 18 batteries. The hub that they have, and this is what you use if you go over 16 batteries, the hub works with groups of 16 batteries. So again, my approach with 8 batteries, 2 groups of 4, makes a lot more sense when paired with the hub. which kind of leads me to think that the better size case is a 4 battery case. It would give you a stack of 8 batteries when put together. You're probably not going to add a third stack on there because you're probably going to exceed your ceiling space, but at least you have 8 batteries instead of 6. Same thing with the brackets that you can use for installing these. It maxes out at 6. So essentially you've got a huge chunk of your vertical space that's unused. Yes, you could put some other stuff above it, some storage racks or something else. But if you're trying to maximize your battery storage, none of these designs make sense. Now here's an example of what makes sense. Now if we look at Renan, this is a lot of batteries stacked up. It's one battery stack for 40 kilowatt hours. This is what people want when they're stacking batteries. They want to maximize their vertical space. Rack batteries have the potential to do this, but none of the people that are producing rack batteries are actually thinking about using vertical space. For whatever reason, they aren't doing that. Now, I actually did look at using Renan batteries in my setup also. The problem was the output capacity of these batteries. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in a few minutes. This is one company that understands the use of vertical space for people that don't have a lot of wall space. Now, I kind of glossed over this pretty quickly. The hub, should you want to use the hub with Pytes batteries, if we go to the actual installation manual, this is where you can see that it supports 16 pieces parallel in each group, and then multiple groups. This is one of the benefits of using Pytes is you essentially have an infinite amount of storage that you could put into this thing from a residential perspective. Literally hundreds of kilowatt hours of storage capacity that you could have with the Pytes system because of this hub and the ability to put in groups of 16 batteries. And again, I'm going to have links in the description of this video for all of this information. So feel free to check out the description along with my affiliate links where you can actually go and check everything out. Now, this is probably a good time to talk about affiliate links in the description of my video. So if we come down here, you're going to see Signature Solar. And this is where you can get your Pytes batteries, the dongles, and a few other things here. And pretty much everything I recommend going to Signature Solar as a starting point to see if they've got it there, because you're going to get better customer service here than pretty much anywhere else you could possibly buy anything. But they don't have everything Pytes related. So I'm going to have some other links in the description of my video for where you can get some of the other things. For example, the Pytes Wi-Fi extension cable that they don't have at the Signature Solar. So, but then I've got an Amazon storefront, and that includes pretty much all the tools and ancillary equipment that I use for different installations, as well as Battery Cable USA. Phenomenal battery cables. I can't say enough good things about their cables, so I highly recommend you check out that link if you're looking for battery cables. All US made products, so if you like supporting US companies, that is a great company to reach out to and buy cables from. And again, they passed my inspection, so they should be good for inspection purposes. And then you've got Lowe's, and for Lowe's, I tend to buy a lot of stuff at Lowe's because I get the military discount there. So I've got some of the things that I've bought for my house at that storefront for you to check out also, as well as some things that I bought to support my battery installation. And then I've also got a Dropbox here where you can actually download different diagrams and things that I've done as part of my home upgrade processes. Now, I mentioned a little bit earlier that with the V-Box, there is a workaround for getting those cables to fit in there. Now, this is a cable that Pytes provides. And again, I'll put the link for this in the description of the video should you need this for your installation needs. It's a 2-meter cable, and that's kind of my only complaint about this cable. It's a great design having this 90 degrees. This should fit perfectly in the V-Box where you get this 90-degree bend like that. So you don't have to worry about whether that 4-aught is going to bend enough to make it work. It's got a 90-degree bend right in there. It's a little pricey, but it's not too bad when you consider that you're getting 2 cables that are 2 meters in length. But my battery install was essentially 8 feet. So just under 3 meters is what I would have needed. And that's kind of the biggest problem I see with this is 2 meters is just too short. What you should do is have this at 3 meters, maybe even 4 meters, or just give the option. But I would say 3 meters works a lot better because I think that's going to work for 90% of the installs out there. And then you can always shorten it. You can always cut this off and then add your own terminal lug on here to fit your situation. So again, I really think this is a great idea. I don't know what the quality of these battery cables is. I assume that it's a high quality battery cable. Ideally, the best solution is they would just provide this part of the cable and then you could build it yourself. That way you could have custom lengths to meet your situation. But at the very least, if you're not going to give the ability for this just be built into your own cables, increase this to 3 meters. I think that's a little bit more practical for most installs. Again, my battery cables were 8 feet. I probably could have made it work with 7 feet if I tightened everything up a little bit closer, but I don't think I ever would have made it down to 2 meters. And again, the higher that you stack those batteries, the longer that you're going to need at least some of that run from the very bottom and from the very top batteries to make sure that it fits. But this is a workaround that might work for your situation, depending on what you're trying to do. Now, why did I choose Pytes batteries over all the other options that are out there? And really, it came down to a couple different things. Obviously, the reliability of Pytes was up there. The warranty was pretty good. They've got a failure rate of like 0.01%, so it's ridiculously low. But really, it came down to this recommended charge and discharge current of 75 amps. That was one of the highest that I saw out there. There are a lot of battery manufacturers that say that they can do a max continuous charge discharge current of 100 amps, but a lot of them set the recommended charge and discharge at, say, 50 amps or even as low as 25 amps in some cases. And usually when you're trying to use your batteries, you want to try to use them at the recommended charge discharge, not necessarily the max continuous, because you're going to wear down your batteries a lot more if you're always going at max continuous charge and discharge. Now, let's talk about the Sol Ark 18K, which is what I installed. That's got a 350 amp battery draw, so it can charge and discharge at 350 amps in order to provide the full 18 kilowatts to the house, or that 75 amps max being provided to your house. Now, with 75 amps, if that's my goal, is to try to get it to 75 amps or less, that's essentially 4 batteries. Now, if I had one battery stack of 4 batteries, and that was the only thing connected to the Sol Ark, I would always be pulling 350 amps, which is right at kind of the max of what the 4 batteries. So I've got a little bit of wiggle room with 4 batteries. Now, if I only had 3 batteries, and the recommended is 75 amps here, like we see, that's essentially 225 amps is kind of your max recommended. Again, it can support all the way up to 100 amps, but with 3 batteries, if I pull the 350, I'm actually exceeding the 100 amps. I'm actually pulling 350 instead of 300 amps, so it's max continuous. So you really need a minimum of 4 batteries in order to support this. Now, if you look at the other batteries that have a recommended of, say, 50 or 25 amps, how many batteries do you need in order to really provide that full 350 amp requirement of the Sol Ark 18K in order to really maximize what you can provide to the house? If you buy a Sol Ark 18K, you're looking to provide 75 amps to your house, which means you have to make sure that your batteries can support that. So for each leg on my batteries, I'm providing 175 amps or the full 350. So 175 amps theoretically to each group of 4 batteries. Now, I actually could add a Sol Ark 18K in parallel, provide 700 amps with the 8 batteries that I've got. But again, I'm going to be running a little bit closer to that max continuous charge discharge than I would prefer, which means I'm going to wear down those batteries a little bit quicker than I would like to see. Assuming, of course, that I'm always maximizing the pull from the batteries. In practice, I'm not usually operating at full 75 amps. I'm a little closer to, say, 35 to 50 amps on most days. So this really isn't a huge issue. But if you have an EV charger, you have a much higher likelihood of hitting that max 75 amps provided for a really long run of time. So you really could hit that max continuous charge and discharge current for your batteries. The reality of how these batteries works, I think, is probably going to be what causes a lot of people issues, especially when you're talking about the Sol Ark 18K, which is a phenomenal device. It provides an incredible amount of power to your house at 75 amps. It's the highest out there that I was able to find. The problem is that you need a lot of battery in order to make that possible. So remember, I talked about the Wren in here, and this is a great amount of capacity. This is essentially the same amount of capacity that my system has. But this system with 40 kilowatt hours of capacity has a max output of 300 amps. It can't provide what the Sol Ark 18K is looking for in order to actually provide the full 75 amps to your house. And this is where I'm thinking that a lot of people will have problems with they're trying to get the Sol Ark 18K, is that they don't buy the right kinds of batteries that are going to support what they're trying to do, especially if they're trying to do it themselves. An installer, I would assume, would catch all of these things. In the case of the Wren, all you have to do is have 2 stacks of at least 4 batteries in order to provide the right amount of power. So you just can't have a single stack. You can make this work in multiple stacks. And this works the same with wall mounted batteries. a single wall-mounted battery is not going to provide enough to the Sol Ark 18K to actually provide the max power to the house. Now, the last thing I wanted to talk about is, in case of the V5, you've actually got a couple different options. You've got the M6 bolts, which is what I used, and then you've got these Sol Ark plugs that a lot of people like these. And I don't mind these. I just found that it's easier to work with what I've always worked with, which is your standard terminal lugs. They're just a lot easier to work with, in my opinion. I've already got all the necessary tools to work with them. I didn't have to buy anything else to make this work. But I do get the sense that maybe Pytes isn't necessarily going to continue the M6 bolts, because the industry does seem to be switching over to these, which they're a really great product. My preference has always been the actual terminal lugs. I just find these easier to work with. It's very easy to create these cables, but there are some benefits of the other batteries that are out there for the Pytes V5s. And if we look to specs here, we can see that there's 3 different versions here between the V5, which is the M6 bolt version that I've got. And then we've got these 2 options, the V5 Alpha and the V5 Alpha Plus. And we can see the most important aspect is that the recommended charge, discharge, max current, all of this information is the exact same on all 3 versions of the product. So you're not losing anything depending on which product you end up going with. There are some interesting spec sheets out there that show different numbers where potentially the recommended charge or discharge rate is 50 amps. I think these are older versions of the manuals. And I would say that the Pytes website is not a very good source of information. It is hard to find stuff. You actually have to go to the different documentation section. The website itself, I think, still only just shows the V5. It doesn't even show you that these other 2 options exist out there. And if we scroll down a little bit, we can see this is the standard V5 version, and then you got the Sol Ark plugs here. Other than that, they look very similar in how these things are set up. If we scroll down a little further, we'll see the Plus has the integrated breaker. And I wish they would include this on all of the versions, or at least have a version of the standard V5 with the M6 bolts that had the ability to have this on there also, because I do like having this. I would have preferred getting a version with this, but the V5 as it stands doesn't have that version. So if you do want to have the integrated breaker, you would have to get the V5 Alpha Plus version of this. So just be aware of that depending on which version you might be trying to get if you're going to go with the Pytes V5 battery. Hopefully you found this content helpful. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button if you like this kind of content. It really does help the channel grow. So that's pretty much everything for my experience with the Pytes V5 installation and some of the thoughts I had about that process and the batteries and the installation, as well as just some general things about rack batteries. Hopefully you found the content helpful. Until next time.